In a cramped, windowless room at the back of this mansion, a 16-year-old boy named Kimmy wakes up every morning on a thin mat on the concrete floor. This room, barely large enough for a bed, has been his entire world for the past 7 years. No windows, no comfort, just 4 walls and the constant fear of what each new day would bring. Every morning at 5 a.m., the sound of aggressive knocking would wake him up. "Kimmy, get up, you worthless boy. Do you think this is a hotel?" The voice belongs to Mama Adunni, a woman who would make your worst nightmare look like a sweet dream. After her husband died 5 years ago, she had transformed from a tolerable presence into Kimmy's personal demon. Picture Kimmy rushing to the kitchen, his hands already bleeding from the previous day's work, scrubbing pots and dishes with soap that burns his open wounds. Then Mama Adunni storms in, dripping in gold jewelry that cost more than most people make in a year. She looks at the plates he's been scrubbing for an hour and screams, "Why are these plates still dirty? Are you blind or just stupid?" Before Kimmy can even respond, she slaps him across the face so hard that the sound echoes through the kitchen. But the real torture comes from her children, 14-year-old Tund and 12-year-old Bucola. These kids had learned cruelty from their mother like other children learn to ride bicycles. Tund walks in with that evil smirk on his face and says, "Mama, this boy broke my PlayStation controller yesterday." Now here's the thing. Kimmy had never even touched that controller. He'd been cleaning the compound all day, but facts don't matter in this house of horror. "I never touched it. I swear. I was cleaning outside all day." Kimmy pleads desperately, but little Bucola, with venom in her 12-year-old voice, snaps back. "So you're calling my brother a liar now? What happens next will make you sick to your stomach." Mama Adunni orders Kimmy to kneel down right there on the kitchen floor. She picks up a wooden spoon and begins beating him while her children laugh like they're watching a comedy show. "No food for you today," she declares. "Maybe hunger will teach you some respect." Now, you might be wondering how a child survives this level of systematic abuse. How does he keep going when every day brings fresh hell? The answer lies in one person who still had a shred of humanity left in this house of monsters. Her name is Aisha, 18 years old, Mama Adunni's niece, and the only person in that house who saw Kimmy as a human being instead of a punching bag. After everyone leaves and Kimmy is left bleeding on the kitchen floor, Aisha would sneak in like an angel of mercy. "Are you okay?" she'd whisper, looking around to make sure no one was watching. When Kimmy tells her he didn't break anything, she simply says, "I know." Then she'd slip him a piece of bread from her wrapper, sometimes the only food he'd get that day. "Hide this. Eat it when she's not around," she'd whisper. And when Kimmy worried about what would happen if Mama Adunni found out, Aisha would promise she won't. "I promise." Little did they know, this promise was about to be tested in the most horrific way possible. For 7 long years, this was Kimmy's life. Wake up at 5, work until midnight, get beaten for things he didn't do, sleep on a mat surrounded by rats, and survive on scraps like a stray dog. While Tund and Bucola went to expensive private schools, Kimmy cleaned their rooms. While they played video games, he washed their clothes. While they ate 3 meals a day, he sometimes went days without food. But here's what's truly remarkable. Despite all this abuse, Kimmy never completely lost hope. Deep inside his heart, he carried a feeling, a memory so faint it was almost like a dream. The memory of someone who once held him close and called him son. Someone whose voice was gentle and loving. Someone who made him feel like he mattered. Let me take you back 9 years ago, to St. Mary's Orphanage. It wasn't a fancy place, but it was filled with love and laughter. 7-year-old Kimmy sat with other children as Sister Mary, a kind nun with gentle eyes, read them bedtime stories. And the prince lived happily ever after. Sister Mary concluded one evening. Little Kimmy, with those intelligent eyes that seemed too old for his face, asked, "Sister Mary, do all stories end happily?" Sister Mary smiled and said, "The best ones do, Kimmy. Sometimes you just have to wait for your happy ending." That's when Mr. Johnson walked in. Mama Adunni's husband, but a completely different person from the monster she would become. He was kind-faced, gentle, with warm eyes that actually saw children as blessings, not burdens. "I'd like to give one of these children a home," he told Sister Mary. As he looked around at all the children, his eyes fell on little Kimmy. "This one," he said. "He has intelligent eyes." Sister Mary nodded approvingly. "Kimmy is special," she said. He's been here since he was very young, found wandering the streets with no memory of his family. Now, remember this detail because it becomes absolutely crucial later in our story. Found wandering the streets with no memory of his family. Mr. Johnson smiled and said, "Then he needs a family now." For 2 beautiful years, Kemi experienced what love felt like. Mr. Johnson treated him like his own son, bought him clothes, taught him to read, made him feel valuable and wanted. But then tragedy struck like lightning from a clear sky. Mr. Johnson died in a car accident when Kemi was 11 years old. And with his death, Kemi's protection vanished. Mama Adunni's true nature emerged like a demon that had been hiding behind a mask of civility. "My husband wasted money feeding your useless mouth," she would scream at him. "You're nothing but a burden. A parasite." She blamed him for everything: the financial stress, her loneliness, even bad weather. And her children, Tund and Bucola, learned to see him as their personal entertainment, someone they could torture whenever they felt bored. But what this family didn't know, what no one in that house had any idea about, was that somewhere else in Nigeria, the most powerful man in the entire country was searching, desperately, frantically, obsessively, for someone he had lost many years ago. Now, let me tell you about President Adebayo, a man who had everything: power, wealth, respect, an entire nation at his command. But there was a hole in his heart that nothing could fill. 12 years ago, his 4-year-old son had been kidnapped during a family outing. Despite deploying every resource at his disposal, the police, the military, private investigators, even international help, the boy had simply vanished like smoke in the wind. Every night for 12 years, President Adebayo would sit in his study, staring at a photo of his little boy, wondering if he was alive, if he was safe, if he would ever see him again. He had aged 20 years in 12, carrying the weight of that loss like a mountain on his shoulders. What he didn't know was that his son was less than 30 minutes away, sleeping on a mat on a concrete floor, being beaten and starved by people who had no idea they were torturing the president's child. But fate has a way of bringing truth to light, and the most shocking revelation was about to unfold. But first, let me tell you about the investigation that was happening behind the scenes, because what President Adebayo discovered will blow your mind. You see, President Adebayo had never stopped searching for his son. Every month, he received reports from private investigators, police units, and international agencies. But 3 months before our story reaches its climax, something incredible happened. A new lead came in from an unexpected source. A former worker at St. Mary's Orphanage contacted the presidential office with information that made the president's heart skip a beat. This worker, Mrs. Ngozi, had kept detailed records that even the orphanage didn't know about. "Mr. President," she said during their secret meeting, "I remember a boy who was brought in 12 years ago, found wandering near the Maitama district after reports of a kidnapping. The boy had trauma-induced amnesia, couldn't remember anything about his family." President Adebayo leaned forward, his hands gripping the table. "What happened to this boy?" "He was adopted by a man named Johnson Adunni. I have the address." Now here's where the story gets even more incredible. President Adebayo immediately sent investigators to the Johnson household, but what they found devastated him. Mr. Johnson had died 5 years earlier in a car accident. The investigators reported that his widow lived there with her children, but when asked about any adopted boys, she denied everything. "There's no adopted child here," Mama Adunni had lied smoothly to the investigators. "My husband never adopted anyone. You must be mistaken." The investigators, seeing only a grieving widow and her well-dressed children in a luxurious home, believed her. After all, why would a wealthy woman lie about something like that? They reported back to the president that it was another dead end. But President Adebayo, a man who hadn't survived Nigerian politics by giving up easily, decided to take matters into his own hands. He began conducting his own surveillance of the Adunni compound, using resources that even his own investigators didn't know about. What he discovered over the next 3 months made his blood run cold. Through long-range cameras and listening devices, he witnessed the systematic abuse of a young man who looked remarkably like his missing son. He watched as Kemi was beaten, starved, and treated worse than an animal. The president's security chief, Colonel Musa, tried to convince him to intervene immediately. "Sir, if this is your son, we need to act now. This abuse is getting worse every day." But President Adebayo, despite his heartbreak, was strategic. "We need absolute proof," he said, though inside he was dying watching his son suffer. "If we move too quickly, and I'm wrong, we could destroy an innocent family's life. But if I'm right, and this woman has been abusing my son for years, I want to catch her in the act. I want undeniable evidence." So for 3 months, while Kemi endured daily torture, President Adebayo collected evidence. Video footage of beatings, audio recordings of verbal abuse, documentation of starvation as punishment. He was building a case that would send these monsters to prison for the rest of their lives. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. One of the surveillance devices picked up a conversation between Aisha and Kemi where she mentioned his birthmark. "That mark on your arm," Aisha had said one evening as she secretly gave him food. "It looks like a crescent moon. It's beautiful. I've had it since I was born," Kemi replied. "Sometimes I touch it and remember. I don't know what I remember. Just feelings. Warmth. Safety." When President Adebayo heard this recording, he knew without a doubt. His son Emeka had been born with a crescent-shaped birthmark on his left arm. He had kissed that birthmark goodnight every single night for 4 years. That's when he decided it was time to act. But here's where the story takes an even more shocking turn. As President Adebayo was planning his rescue mission, something happened that nearly destroyed everything. 3 days before the president was scheduled to arrive at the compound, Mama Adunni received a phone call that changed everything. It was from her late husband's brother, Uncle Emeka, calling from London. "Sister-in-law," Uncle Emeka said over the crackling international line, "I have some disturbing news. I've been doing some research into our family history, and I discovered something about that boy you're keeping in your house." Mama Adunni's heart started racing. "What do you mean? I think that boy might be from a very important family. My contacts in the government have been asking questions about missing children from 12 years ago. Important children. Presidential children." The phone nearly slipped from Mama Adunni's hands. Uncle Emeka continued, "If what I suspect is true, you could be in serious trouble. Maybe it's time to let the boy go. Send him back to an orphanage. Distance yourself from whatever this situation is." But instead of heeding this warning, Mama Adunni's mind went to a dark place. If this boy was truly from an important family, and if that family was looking for him, then she had a problem. A big problem. Because the condition he was in would send her to prison for life. That's when she made a decision that would haunt her forever. She decided that instead of letting Kemi go, she would make sure he could never tell anyone what had happened to him in her house. The next morning, Mama Adunni woke up with murder in her heart. She had convinced herself that the only way to protect her family was to permanently silence Kemi. She began planning what she would tell people, that he had run away, or that he had died in an accident. She even picked out a spot in the backyard where she could bury his body. But she needed a reason, something that would justify extreme action in front of her children and niece. That's when she hatched the plan involving the stolen money. She took 5,000 naira from her own purse and gave it to Tund with specific instructions. "Hide this money, then claim it was stolen from your room. Blame Kemi. Make sure everyone hears you accusing him of theft." Tund, excited by the prospect of getting Kemi in even more trouble than usual, eagerly agreed. He had no idea his mother was planning murder. So when Tund burst into the kitchen that Tuesday morning screaming about stolen money, it wasn't random cruelty. It was a calculated setup for murder. Now, while this evil plan was unfolding in the Adunni household, President Adebayo was making his final preparations for the rescue mission. But he had no idea how close he was cutting it. If he had arrived just 1 day later, he would have found only a shallow grave in the backyard. Mama Adunni came running, her face already twisted with rage before she even heard the details. "What did you say?" "I had 5,000 naira on my desk," Tund continued with Oscar-worthy performance. "I went to the bathroom for 5 minutes, and when I came back, it was gone. And I saw him coming out of my room." Kemi's blood ran cold. "That's not true. I wasn't even upstairs. I've been in the kitchen all morning." But Bukola, not to be outdone by her brother's performance, chimed in, "I saw him too. He was acting suspicious, looking around like a thief." The beautiful thing about lies is that they multiply like bacteria in a petri dish. Soon, the entire family was convinced that Kemi had committed this theft, despite the fact that he had no access to their rooms and had been under constant supervision all morning. "Where is my money?" Mama Adunni screamed, grabbing Kemi by his torn shirt. What did you do with it, you ungrateful thief? I didn't take anything. Please, Ma. I swear by my life. I didn't take any money. But his protests fell on deaf ears. Mama Adunni began beating him with a fury that was frightening to behold. She used her fists, her slippers, anything she could get her hands on. Tund and Bucola stood by, cheering her on like spectators at a boxing match. Pack your things, she screamed between blows. Get out of my house. I will not harbor a thief. As Kemi tried to protect his face from the rain of blows, Aisha came running from her room, having heard the commotion. Aunt, please stop. You're going to kill him. Good. Mama Adunni snarled. One less mouth to feed. But Aisha, brave Aisha, stepped between them. He didn't steal anything. I was with him all morning. We were talking in the kitchen. The moment those words left her mouth, the atmosphere in the room changed. Mama Adunni's eyes went wide, not with surprise, but with a different kind of anger. You were talking to him? She said slowly, dangerously. Talking to this thief? Aisha realized her mistake immediately, but it was too late. In trying to save Kemi, she had revealed their friendship, their secret kindnesses, their shared moments of humanity in this house of cruelty. So you've been helping him all along, Mama Adunni continued, her voice getting quieter, which somehow made it more terrifying. Feeding him behind my back. Treating him like family when he's nothing but a servant. What happened next was so brutal, so shocking, that even Tund and Bucola stopped laughing. Mama Adunni turned her rage on Aisha, slapping her so hard that she stumbled backward. You ungrateful girl. I feed you, clothe you, give you shelter, and this is how you repay me? By conspiring with a thief. As both Kemi and Aisha lay on the floor, bruised and bleeding, Mama Adunni made a declaration that would change everything. Both of you get out, pack your things, and leave my house. Today. But as she was screaming and the chaos reached its peak, something extraordinary happened. The sound of car engines could be heard approaching the compound. Not just one car, but several. The deep, powerful rumble of expensive vehicles moving in formation. Mama Adunni paused in her tirade, cocking her head to listen. Who could that be? She muttered, her anger momentarily replaced by curiosity. The sound grew louder. Through the window, they could see a convoy of black SUVs approaching the gate. These weren't ordinary cars. They were the kind of vehicles that only very important people rode in. The kind with tinted windows and government plates. Mama, those look like government cars, Bucola whispered, suddenly less confident than she had been moments before. As the convoy pulled into the compound, Mama Adunni quickly tried to compose herself, smoothing down her wrapper and checking her appearance in the hallway mirror. Important people meant opportunity, and opportunity meant money. Tund, Bucola, go to your rooms and make sure you look presentable, she ordered. Then she turned to Kemi and Aisha, who were still on the floor. You two, get to the back of the house. Hide. I don't want important people seeing this mess. But as they struggled to get up, the sound of car doors slamming echoed through the compound. Heavy footsteps approached the front door. Then came the knock. Not the angry pounding that Kemi was used to, but the firm, authoritative knock of someone accustomed to having doors opened for them immediately. Mama Adunni rushed to the door, putting on her most charming smile. She opened it expecting to see local politicians or wealthy businessmen. What she saw instead made her legs nearly give out from shock. Standing at her doorstep was President Adebayo himself, flanked by his security detail. The President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria was standing at her front door, his eyes scanning the interior of her house with an intensity that made her stomach clench with sudden fear. Good morning, madam, the president said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. I am looking for someone. Mama Adunni's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She had seen this man on television 1,000 times, but seeing him in person, in her living room, was overwhelming. Your Excellency, she stammered, dropping to her knees in the traditional greeting. You honor my humble home with your presence. But President Adebayo wasn't interested in pleasantries. His eyes continued to scan the house, searching for something, or someone. I am looking for a young man, about 16 years old. He would have been brought here as a child, perhaps from an orphanage. The words hit Mama Adunni like a physical blow. Her eyes darted involuntarily toward the back of the house, where she had just sent Kemi to hide. The president, trained in reading people's reactions, caught that glance immediately. Inspector General Yakubu stepped forward. Madam, we have evidence that suggests a child matching this description has been living in this house under questionable circumstances. Mama Adunni's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. I don't understand, Your Excellency. There must be some mistake. There is no mistake, the president interrupted, pulling out his phone. On the screen was a video, grainy surveillance footage of Kemi being beaten in this very kitchen just hours earlier. We have been watching this house for months. The blood drained from Mama Adunni's face as she realized the magnitude of her situation. They had evidence. They had been watching. They knew everything. I have been searching for 12 years, President Adebayo continued, his voice growing more emotional. My son was taken from me when he was 4 years old. Emeka Adebayo. And I have reason to believe he is in this house, being abused by you and your family. The word son hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Tund and Bukola, who had been peeking from their room, felt their legs go weak. They suddenly understood that they hadn't just been bullying some random orphan. They had been torturing the president's son, the heir to the most powerful family in Nigeria. Aisha, still nursing her bruised face, looked toward the back of the house where Kemi was hiding, pieces of an impossible puzzle starting to come together in her mind. All those times Kemi seemed different from other servants. The way he carried himself with unconscious dignity. The way he could read and write better than Tund and Bukola despite never going to school. The intelligence in his eyes that even beatings couldn't diminish. But Mama Adunni, in her panic and desperation, made the worst possible choice. Even faced with overwhelming evidence, even knowing she was caught, she decided to lie one more time. Your Excellency, I think there has been a terrible misunderstanding. The only young man in this house is a servant boy we took in from an orphanage. But he's nobody special. Just a house help. We've been taking care of him out of charity. President Adebayo's eyes blazed with fury. Charity? You call systematic abuse charity? He gestured to one of his security officers, who immediately produced a tablet showing video footage. Would you like to explain this? He asked, turning the screen toward Mama Adunni. On the screen was clear video of her beating Kemi with a wooden spoon while her children laughed. The audio was crystal clear. No food for you today? Maybe hunger will teach you some respect. Mama Adunni's mouth fell open as she realized they had everything on camera. Every beating, every cruel word, every moment of torture had been recorded. Or perhaps you'd like to explain this? The president showed another video, Bukola deliberately tripping Kemi as he carried a heavy load of laundry, causing him to fall and spill everything, then watching as her mother beat him for the accident. Video after video played, weeks of documented abuse, starvation, and cruelty. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Where is my son? The president demanded, his voice now carrying the full authority of his office. Bring him to me. Now. The authority in his voice made it clear that this was not a request. Mama Adunni's hands were shaking as she called out, Kemi, come here, quickly. But as they waited for Kemi to appear, President Adebayo's mind was racing with memories. Let me tell you about the day his son was kidnapped, because understanding that day will make what happens next even more powerful. It was 12 years ago, during the annual Children's Day celebration in Abuja. President Adebayo, who was then a senator, had taken his 4-year-old son Emeka to the Eagle Square festivities. It was supposed to be a day of joy and celebration. Little Emeka was wearing his favorite blue shirt and clutching a small toy car that his father had bought him. Papa, can we get ice cream? He had asked with those bright, intelligent eyes. Of course, my prince, President Adebayo had replied, lifting his son onto his shoulders. Anything for my boy. They were walking through the crowded square when it happened. A group of men, later identified as part of an international trafficking ring, created a distraction, a fake fight that drew everyone's attention. In the chaos that followed, little Emeka simply vanished. One moment he was on his father's shoulders, laughing and pointing at the colorful balloons. The next moment, he was gone. Just gone. President Adebayo searched frantically through the crowd, screaming his son's name. Emeka! Emeka! But it was as if the earth had swallowed the boy whole. The investigation that followed was the largest missing persons case in Nigerian history. Roads were blocked, airports were shut down, international borders were monitored. But the kidnappers had planned perfectly. They had escape routes that even the government couldn't track. For months, President Adebayo received ransom calls, false leads, and cruel hoaxes. People would call claiming to have his son, demanding money, only to disappear when arrangements were made. Each false hope broke his heart a little more. The worst call came 6 months after the kidnapping. A man with a disguised voice said, "Your son is dead. Stop looking. Stop hoping. He's gone forever." That call nearly destroyed President Adebayo. His wife, Emeka's mother, had a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized for months. Their marriage couldn't survive the grief. She blamed him for not protecting their child, and he blamed himself for the same thing. But something inside him, some paternal instinct, refused to believe his son was dead. "I would know," he told his advisors. "I would feel it in my soul if my boy was gone. He's alive. Somewhere out there. He's alive and waiting for me to find him." That belief sustained him through 12 years of searching, 12 years of following false leads, 12 years of never giving up hope. Now, as he stood in Mama Adunni's living room, waiting for Kemi to appear, all those years of searching, all that pain and hope and determination had led to this single moment. From the back of the house, they could hear hesitant footsteps approaching. Each step seemed to take forever. Mama Adunni was praying to every deity she could think of that somehow, miraculously, this wouldn't be the end of her world. But then Kemi appeared in the doorway, and everything changed forever. Kemi appeared in the doorway, his face still swollen from the beating, his clothes torn, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. He had no idea why there were so many important-looking men in the house, but he had learned that when important people came around, bad things usually happened to him. The moment President Adebayo's eyes fell on Kemi, everything in the room stopped. Time itself seemed to pause as the president's face went through a series of emotions: shock, recognition, disbelief, and then overwhelming joy mixed with rage. "My God," the president whispered, taking a step forward. His hands were trembling now. "My son, my boy." Kemi looked around confused, not understanding what was happening. "Sir," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. But President Adebayo was studying every feature of Kemi's face. The eyes, those intelligent eyes that had caught Mr. Johnson's attention all those years ago. The nose, the chin, the way he carried himself despite his obvious fear. And there, on his left arm, a small birthmark in the shape of a crescent moon. "Show me your left arm," the president commanded gently. Kemi, confused but obedient, rolled up his torn sleeve. There it was, the birthmark that President Adebayo had kissed goodnight every evening for 4 years before his son disappeared. "Oh my God," the president breathed, and for a moment, this powerful man who commanded armies and ran a nation looked like nothing more than a father who had found his lost child. "It's really you." "Kemi." "No, your name is Emeka. Emeka Adebayo." The name hit Kemi like a lightning bolt. Suddenly, flashes of memory began flooding back. A man's voice singing lullabies, strong arms lifting him up, the smell of expensive cologne, the feeling of absolute safety and love. Images that had been buried so deep he thought they were dreams came rushing back to the surface. "Papa." The word came out of Kemi's mouth before he could stop it, a memory from when he was 4 years old suddenly crystal clear. President Adebayo's composure finally broke. Tears began streaming down his face as he rushed forward and wrapped his son in his arms. "Yes, my boy. Yes, it's Papa. I found you. After all these years, I found you." The room was in absolute shock. Mama Adunni had gone completely white, understanding the magnitude of what she had done. Tund and Bukola were clutching each other, finally realizing that they had been torturing the president's son for 7 years. Aisha had tears streaming down her face, but hers were tears of joy and relief. But what happened next was even more emotional. As President Adebayo held his son, Emeka's buried memories came flooding back like a dam bursting. He remembered everything: the kidnapping, the trauma, the years of suppressed memories suddenly crystal clear. "Papa," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I remember now. The men who took me, they said they would kill you if I ever told anyone who I was. They said they would hurt you if I remembered. So I tried to forget. I tried so hard to forget that I almost lost myself." President Adebayo's heart shattered as he understood what his son had endured. Not just the physical abuse from the Adunni family, but the psychological torture of forcing himself to forget his own identity to protect his father. You were just a baby, the president whispered, holding his son tighter. You were trying to protect me, even as a 4-year-old child. Colonel Musa, the president's security chief, stepped forward with additional information that made the situation even more shocking. Sir, we've discovered something else. The trafficking ring that kidnapped your son, they were paid by someone who wanted to hurt you politically. This wasn't random. Your son was targeted specifically because you were investigating government corruption. This revelation added another layer of tragedy to the story. Emeka hadn't just been kidnapped for ransom. He had been taken as part of a political plot to destroy his father's career and break his spirit. Who? President Adebayo asked, his voice dangerous. We're still investigating, but we believe it was Senator Ogbonna, the man you were about to expose for embezzling education funds. He paid the traffickers to take your son and make sure he was never found. The irony was devastating. Emeka had been kidnapped because his father was trying to protect Nigeria's children by stopping corruption in the education system. And for 12 years, he had suffered because his father was a good man fighting bad people. As father and son held each other, President Adebayo began to see the full extent of what his child had endured. The swollen face, the bleeding hands, the malnourished frame, the fear in his eyes. It all told a story of systematic abuse that made the president's blood boil with rage. But there was something else he noticed. Despite everything Emeka had been through, despite 7 years of hell, there was still light in his eyes, still goodness in his heart, still hope in his spirit. The abuse hadn't broken him. It had made him stronger. He slowly released his son and turned to face Mama Adunni, who had now fallen to her knees, shaking uncontrollably. What have you done to my child? He asked, his voice deadly quiet. Mama Adunni tried to speak, but only strangled sounds came out. The president continued, his voice getting stronger with each word. For 7 years, I have searched every corner of this country for my son. I hired investigators. I offered rewards. I never stopped looking. And all this time, he was here, being treated like a slave in your house. He gestured to his security detail, and they immediately understood. Arrest this woman, he commanded. And those children. I want them all charged with child abuse, kidnapping, and assault. No, please. Mama Adunni finally found her voice. We didn't know. We had no idea he was your son. We took him from an orphanage. We were helping him. President Adebayo's voice rose to a roar. You call this help? Look at him. Look at my son. He's malnourished, covered in bruises, terrified. You've been torturing him. As the security officers moved to arrest the family, President Adebayo knelt down to look at his son again. Can you forgive me for taking so long to find you? He whispered. Kemi. Emeka looked into his father's eyes, and despite everything he had endured, despite 7 years of hell, he managed a small smile. You found me, Papa. That's what matters. But the president had one more question, and he turned to Aisha, who had been silent through all of this. And you? What is your role in this house? Aisha, still bruised from her beating, stood up straight and looked him in the eyes. Your Excellency, I tried to help him. I gave him food when they starved him. I tried to protect him when I could. President Adebayo studied her face, seeing the fresh bruises, understanding that she had been punished for her kindness. You risked yourself to help my son. He didn't deserve what they did to him, she said simply. No one does. The president nodded slowly. You will come with us. As my son's friend, you are now under my protection. As the Adunni family was led away in handcuffs, screaming and pleading, President Adebayo wrapped his arm around his son and began leading him toward the convoy of cars. Papa, Emeka said quietly, what happens now? President Adebayo smiled, the first genuine smile he had worn in 12 years. Now, my son, you come home. You take your rightful place as my child, as a prince of this nation. You will never want for anything again. You will never be hurt again. I promise you that. As they walked toward the cars, Emeka turned back to look at the house that had been his prison for 7 years. But instead of anger or hatred, he felt something unexpected, pity. Pity for the people who had been so consumed by cruelty that they couldn't recognize the humanity in a child. Pity for Tund and Bukola, who had been raised to be monsters. And especially pity for Mama Adunni, who had let bitterness turn her heart to stone. Papa, he said as they reached the cars, what will happen to them? President Adebayo looked at his son with amazement. After everything they had done to him, he was still capable of compassion. They will face justice, my son. But their punishment will come from the courts, not from us. As the convoy pulled away from the compound, Emeka pressed his face to the window, watching his former prison shrink in the distance. Beside him sat Aisha, who would go on to become like a sister to him. And across from him sat his father, who would spend the rest of his life making up for the years they had lost. As the convoy pulled away from the compound, Emeka pressed his face to the window, watching his former prison shrink in the distance.